You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, July 28th, 2023.
6.
This week's Procurement 6 is brought to you by the 2023 SaaS and Software Spend Management Survey we are running in partnership with the team at Productive. SaaS applications are affordable and easy to sign up for. That's great for the business and users, but challenging for procurement. While we don't want to be a roadblock, we do also need to optimize the whole portfolio of IT spend, maximize per app returns, and protect against InfoSec risks. If you'd like to take this quick survey, just 2 to 3 minutes, check out the link in today's show notes.
5.
This week's Art of Procurement podcast featured Heba Farouk, the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Saudi German Health. During the conversation, she talked about what changed for her team during the pandemic, but maybe more interestingly, what changed after the pandemic. Let's listen.
So I'm going to wrap up with one last question, and it's probably a question we've talked about a little bit through the conversation. We talk all the time on the podcast around how procurement and supply chain became a lot more relevant during the pandemic for obvious reasons, and that the opportunity that provided, which you just talked about there, the challenge for procurement and supply chain is how to remain relevant once those pressures dissipate a little bit. And so I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how you think about maintaining kind of the relevancy of procurement and supply chain once the underlying issues that brought us to this position are not as important, for the doctors and for surgeons and for the CEO or the CFO and all the folks as they're looking now, okay, let's pivot back to growth. How do you remain relevant?
Well, I can say it in a very harsh statement, but I believe it's true. Never feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In supply chain department, if you feel safe and secure that everything is fine, the money is here, the companies are open, the doctors are following what we were telling them, you lose everything. You lose all the strings. Yeah. Never feel safe. It's not about safe as a person, of course. It's safe about a process and a safety of a patient. Because if the pandemic was something that hit the entire world, so we felt it, but in every healthcare premises, there are patients that are hit by a way or another. So it's happening every day, every hour, in every hospital, in every department, whether ICU, OR, in a patient rooms, there are the risk there. They are not safe. They are struggling for their health. So it's not over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not true. It's not a pandemic, but it's there. So still we have to do, definitely it's much more in a relief phase, and it's not that kind of stress on heart and everything, and not kind of that of stressful shortage when it comes to the supplies and the availability. It's better now, but still there. Yeah. I kept some kind of KPIs. I changed some kind of my success indicators in my entire department, completely changed it after the pandemic. I changed the bars in levels in my area stores and in my warehouse. The way I used to plan, the contingency plan, it was always an alternative for the medication or alternative for a material. No, it's completely different now. Contingency plan or scenario planning is completely changing what you're using with something completely different if it's not available. So we started to work on having those kind of contingencies for every item in the hospital if applicable. And there's one important thing also I felt, that during the pandemic, the patients and their families become very aware and concerned with the materials and with the names and with the quality and with what we're going to use for this or that. That we didn't used to face it before. We didn't used to find a patient coming to us and ask about a specific cannula or a specific technology and what kind of medication we're going to give to the patient, or what kind of the specs of the mask. Is it 3 or more? Is it N or what? They became more oriented. They're now currently searching and Googling and asking about a material and name and specs and the country of origin and how it's used and the success rate and papers and if it's FDA or CE. They didn't used to do that before, so they're concerned. It's very important to support them in their concern and provide them the relief. And this is what we're doing with the doctors. Now we speak to the doctor, please. You speak to the patient that you be using this material with this feature and for this benefit. Give him the trust in what we're buying. Because even if the doctor left, if we changed something in the hospital, those kind of quality things will stay. So there was always a point of trust to the patient.
There is nothing in the world quite like an educated consumer. That is true in B2B settings, the B2C world, and now in healthcare. Their expectations are a moving target, and they're going to keep us all on our toes. To listen to the full episode, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast or search for Art of Procurement and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
4.
This week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast features my favorite regular repeat guest, Chris Lance from Una. We had an absolute blast with this question. Would you let Elon Musk implant a chip in your brain? Granted, this new nanotechnology is intended for paralysis victims, sort of like an updated version of the support Stephen Hawking received. But you know it is only a matter of time before someone wants a chip in their head to open the garage door or buy a coffee at Starbucks without fishing out their wallet. To hear our conversation, which includes some ethical trade-off questions, and to explore other episodes of the show, you can use the link in today's show notes or find the Sourcing Hero wherever you listen to podcast audio.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
In this week's episode of Dial P for Procurement, I made the case that public school education should be part of all corporate social responsibility programs. Here are a few statistics for you. Skills gaps currently cost the U.S. economy around $13 billion per month and may add up to $2.5 trillion over the next decade. By 2030, more than 85 million jobs could go unfilled because there aren't enough skilled people to take them. Now, at the same time, children lost 1/3 of a school year during the pandemic shutdowns. The average math score for 13-year-olds fell 9 points from 2019 to 2021. That is the largest drop since the federal government started tracking in 1978. And students made less progress this last school year, even being back in the classroom, than they did in the average year before the pandemic. Education is a problem for companies. Look at the communities your facilities are located in. Your employees' kids go to school there. Your prospective employees' kids go to school there. It is worth fighting for those schools and the system they're a part of. If your company is thinking about your talent program 10 years out, side note, you should be, then today's middle schoolers are part of the workforce you'll be looking to recruit. Children are our future, but we are failing them in the present. They're missing out on fundamentals, they're bearing the burdens of disadvantaged communities, and some of them are just completely slipping between the cracks. Check out the full episode and accompanying long-form article on Art of Procurement, or subscribe to the Dial P for Procurement podcast on all major podcast platforms.
2.
In my next story, I bring you good news. At least, I think I bring you good news. This week, UPS and the Teamsters Union came to an agreement that prevents 340,000 U.S. drivers from going on strike. If a strike had taken place, it would have been enormously disruptive to the economy. That is the good news. But the story doesn't quite end there. There are two interesting details about this story that are worth continuing to watch even after all of the self-congratulations in the media end. The first is that the Teamsters union members still have to ratify the agreement. There is no way that will be done by July 31st, the expiration date for the current contract. But I'm sure everyone will act in good faith, unless they don't. And that's certainly part of what we saw with the Railway Workers Union at the end of last year. There may be additional renegotiations and additional concerns about even localized or regionalized strikes. The second thing to keep an eye on actually is happening at the federal level, and that's the status of nominated Labor Secretary Julie Su. She was former Secretary Marty Walsh's number 2, and she was nominated to replace him when he went off to head the NHL Players Union. But despite being nominated, she doesn't have the votes to be confirmed by the Senate. So she's indefinitely the, quote, acting labor secretary. Trade groups are already challenging her authority because she doesn't have the confirmation, meaning that more strikes in different industries and different service groups may be on the way. One of those trade groups challenging her authority includes companies like DoorDash, Grubhub, Lyft, and Uber. So we'll be watching the headlines for more on this combination of stories. Check out today's show notes for links about the UPS Teamsters strike and Julie Su's acting challenges.
1.
Before I let you go, I want to mention an upcoming event that you won't want to miss. On August 8th, we're hosting Category Palooza, our annual summer festival of category insights. Join us live for 3 hours of sessions that cover categories like packaging and energy and utilities, as well as cross-category information about globalization and GPOs. We're actually kicking off this year with Matt Mailer, the former head of procurement from Madison Square Garden in New York City. And boy, does he have some stories to tell. You won't want to miss it, so check out the link down in today's show notes and make sure you register to join us on August 8th.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.